Akachi grew up in the small, quiet village of Enwei, where life had never been easy. After his father passed away, he and his widowed mother, Ayama, were left to fend for themselves. They lived in a modest mud house at the edge of the village, and despite their best efforts, poverty clung to them like a shadow. Akechi worked as a salesboy in a small pharmacy at the village market, earning just enough to barely afford the basics. Even so, most months he found himself borrowing food or supplies on credit, hoping to pay it off once he received his meager salary. But the money was never enough. Every month ended the same way, with unpaid debts, worried faces, and hollow promises. His mother, too, was constantly borrowing from neighbors, pledging to repay them once her son got paid. Over time, people grew tired of their excuses and began to distance themselves. The few friends they had slowly faded away. The only food they could afford to grow were cassava and a few vegetables on the small plot of land left behind by Akachi's father. Most nights they ate nothing but fufu and watery soup. Despite the hardship, Akachi was not the kind of young man to give up easily. He had dreams, big ones. Every time he saw other boys his age return to the village in fancy clothes and flashy motorbikes, his chest tightened with longing. Most of his peers had already left the village in search of something better, and when they came back, it was clear that they had found it. Akachi watched them with envy and hope. They were proof that there was something more out there beyond the dust roads of Niue, beyond the quiet markets and the predictable misery of village life. He started to believe that if he stayed, he would never have a chance to rise. The problem was he didn't know where to begin. He had no money, no connections, and no plan. Still, that didn't stop him from dreaming. Night after night, he lay awake thinking about what could be, staring at the cracked ceiling of their tiny home, wondering how he could ever escape. One day, he shared his thoughts with his mother, and after a long silence, Emma made a painful decision. She gathered her most prized possessions, her traditional wrappers, and sold them to raise a small amount of money to support her son's journey. "Go, my son," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Go and find a better life. Just don't forget your mother." With nothing but a worn-out travel bag, a heart full of hope, and a few crumpled bills, Akachi left Niue. He boarded an old bus to Asaba, a city he had only heard about from others. The city was alive in a way he had never seen, cars zooming past, tall buildings, and crowds of people with places to be. For the first time in his life, Akachi felt truly lost. He had no contacts, no idea where to sleep, and no job lined up. That first day, he simply wandered through the city streets, watching others live lives he had only imagined. As night began to fall and the streets thinned out, reality began to settle in. He had nowhere to go. He hadn't thought this far ahead. But as luck would have it, he stumbled upon a group of young men and women gathered outside a gated compound. Curious, he asked what was going on, and one of them told him they were waiting to be selected for a night shift at a bakery. It was the kind of opportunity Akachi had been praying for. With nothing to lose, he waited alongside them, hopeful. That night, he got his first job in the city, working from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. for 900 naira. It wasn't much, but it was something. As he held the money in his hands the next morning, tired but proud, Akachi allowed himself a rare smile. Maybe this was the beginning he had been searching for. Akachi's first few nights at the bakery were a mix of exhaustion and gratitude. The work was hard, the hours long, and the pay minimal, but it was still better than sleeping on the street. After his first shift, when he hesitated about where to go, the bakery manager took pity on him and allowed him to stay in the security post for a while. It wasn't much, just a small space with barely enough room to lie down, but to Akachi it felt like a blessing. He washed up, bought a sausage roll and satchel water with part of his pay, and caught some sleep for the first time in what felt like days. But the next night, things changed. After his second shift, he returned to the security post only to find his travel bag tossed outside the door. Before he could react, the manager stepped out and told him coldly to take his bag and leave. No explanation, no compassion. Just like that, he was back on the street again, confused, heartbroken, and alone in a city that didn't care whether he lived or died. As he wandered aimlessly through the night, unsure of where to go, someone called out to him. It was a familiar face, one of the young men from the bakery shift. The guy named Nanso asked where Akachi was headed, and when Akachi admitted he had nowhere to go, Nanso, without hesitation, told him to come along. I told him to come along. They walked quietly through narrow streets until they arrived at a cramped one-room apartment. This is where I manage, Nanso said with a soft smile. The space was small and barely furnished, but to Akachi, it felt warmer than any mansion. Melissa wasn't just kind, she was a lifeline. Over the next few days, he helped Akachi settle into the rhythm of survival in Nasaba. During the night, they worked at the bakery, and during the day, Nanso took on several odd jobs cleaning, offloading goods, construction, whatever paid. Eventually, he introduced Akachi to the same gigs. Though the work was hard and sometimes demeaning, it was honest, and Akachi admired how determined Nanso was to keep going. Still deep inside, Akachi began to feel restless. 2 months passed, and the reality of city life hit him like a hammer. He wasn't saving anything. The cost of food, transport, and basic survival swallowed up everything he earned. He couldn't send anything home to his mother. He was working harder than he ever had, yet he was stuck in the same cycle of lack. One morning, while out on a job with Nanso, Akachi's life changed forever. They stumbled upon a construction site that needed laborers for the day, and both quickly joined in. Hours into mixing cement under the scorching sun, a shiny G-Wagon SUV pulled up to the site. 2 sharply dressed young men stepped out, and everyone on the site, including the engineer, treated them with obvious respect. As the men were shown around, Akachi froze in place, staring in disbelief. These guys weren't just rich, they were young, younger than him even. And yet they had everything he dreamed of: luxury, power, control. Something inside him snapped. He knew he couldn't go on like this, struggling every day just to breathe. In a moment of desperation, he quietly excused himself, left the site, and positioned himself along the road, waiting for the SUV to pass. When it finally did, he stepped out and flagged it down. What followed was a desperate plea. He dropped to his knees in the dust, tears in his eyes, begging the men to help him, to take a chance on him. His words were messy, his voice cracked, but his heart was sincere. And somehow that honesty moved them. After a brief exchange of glances, one of the men nodded and said, "You're lucky you stopped us. We'll help you if you're really ready to do what it takes." Without thinking twice, Akachi jumped into the car, completely unaware that his decision, born from desperation, would set him on a path more dangerous and complex than he could ever imagine. The moment Akachi stepped into the G-Wagon, he felt like he had just entered another world. The leather seats, the cold air conditioning, the faint scent of wealth, it all overwhelmed him. He could barely sit still, whispering prayers under his breath, certain that this was his breakthrough. The 2 young men introduced themselves simply as Anu and Ono, the owners of the luxury car and the building under construction. They told him they were taking him to a meeting that would change his life forever. Akachi clung to every word. Eventually, they pulled up in front of a massive mansion. Inside, Akachi was surprised to see dozens of young men and women, all dressed in white, chatting with wine glasses in hand. It looked more like a party than any kind of business meeting. The atmosphere was warm but mysterious, like a place where people smiled too much and asked too few questions. Then an elderly man entered the room, and suddenly everything shifted. Everyone grew silent, bowed respectfully, and the man sat on a grand throne-like chair. Akechi's heart raced. He had no idea what was happening, but it was clear this man was someone important. When Anna introduced him as someone who was desperate for change, the old man referred to as the Grand Master called Akechi forward and welcomed him into the fold. What followed felt like a dream, strange, surreal, and laced with quiet dread. The Grandmaster told Akechi that his wealth would come, but not through hard work or business. Instead, it would flow through a magical bowl he was handed seemingly out of thin air. The old man explained that Akechi would have to disguise himself as a beggar and go out into the streets twice a week. Anyone who gave him money would unknowingly surrender their glory, their fortune, their favor, their luck. That glory, he said, would become Akechi's wealth. The more people gave, the richer Akechi would become. No blood would be shed, no lives taken, just silent exchanges, one person's kindness feeding another man's greed. Akechi stood frozen. A part of him wanted to ask questions, to protest, to walk away. But the idea of getting rich without violence, it sounded too easy to turn down. He was tired of suffering, of watching his mother suffer. If this was his way out, then maybe, just maybe, it wasn't so bad, he agreed. When he left the mansion that night, the magical bowl was hidden inside a plastic bag and his mind was racing. When Nanso asked where he had been all day, Akechi lied, claiming he had found better-paying labor work. That night, while Nanso headed off to the bakery, Akechi stayed back, tearing holes in an old shirt and trousers. He was preparing to become someone else entirely. The next morning, as Nanso slept after his shift, Akechi quietly slipped out of the house and made his way to another part of town. There, he found an unfinished building where he changed into his tattered clothes and limped into the street with his new persona. At first, the experience was humiliating. People ignored him, insulted him, even told him to get a job. He returned to Ano that afternoon, frustrated and humiliated. But, simply laughed and told him the harsh truth. No one pities a strong, able-bodied man. If you want money, you have to look broken, he said. That night, Akechi stood in front of the mirror, twisting his face, bending his hands, and limping across the room until he looked convincingly disabled. The next day, when he returned to the street as an imbecile, the result was instant. People stopped, sympathized, and dropped money into his bowl. When the sun set, Akechi returned to the Grandmaster with his collection, and just like that, the bowl was taken and he was given the keys to a furnished house waiting for him. He entered to find a room piled with cash. His knees buckled and he fainted. When he woke up, it was no longer a dream. He had made it. He was rich. In just a few days, the boy who once begged for a chance was now pretending to beg for wealth. And the worst part? He didn't feel guilty, not yet. Akechi adjusted quickly to his new lifestyle. The modest one-room apartment he once shared with Nanso became a distant memory as he settled into his fully furnished house with shiny tiles, polished wood, and more space than he knew what to do with it. Each week, he stuck to his new routine twice a week. He disguised himself as an imbecile and went out begging with the enchanted bowl. It worked like magic. People gave him money out of sympathy, unaware that their generosity was costing them something far more precious than Naira. It was their spiritual grace, their good fortune. Every time he handed the money over to the Grandmaster, he would return home to find a fresh stack of cash waiting for him in the secret room. As time passed, he began to build a life of comfort and control. He opened 2 pharmacy shops under his name and hired people to run them. His wealth was no longer a dream or a prayer, it was his reality, and in that reality, Akechi started to believe that this was all simply his reward for enduring years of suffering. He had stopped thinking about where the money came from or what it meant to take from others. As long as he wasn't shedding blood or hurting anyone physically, it didn't seem all that wrong. After 6 months of living like a king, Akechi returned to his village, this time in a brand new Range Rover. As he pulled into the compound, people gathered to see who the unexpected guest was. His mother, Ima, stepped out of their worn-down house and froze at the sight of him in expensive clothes and stepping out of a luxurious car. "Akechi, is this really you?" she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. He smiled, held her tight, and replied, "It's me, Mama. It's me, Mama. God has finally remembered us." Inside the house, Ima made him a meal with the little she had, and they sat together for the first time in months. She was overjoyed at first, praising God and calling neighbors to come see her son. But after the excitement settled, her motherly instincts took over. Something didn't sit right with her. The change was too sudden. The story he told about saving a sick old man and being rewarded sounded rehearsed, too perfect. That night, she had a strange and frightening dream. When she woke up, she was shaken and called Akechi to sit with her. "My son," she said gently, "I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, but I saw something dark in my dream. Please, if there's any evil in this wealth, walk away from it now. Nothing good comes from shortcuts. I don't want to lose you." Her words struck a chord in him, but he quickly covered it with a forced smile. "Mama, you worry too much," he said, brushing her hair with affection. He offered her a thick wad of cash before leaving, but she refused to take it. "I don't want it," she said firmly. "Keep it? Just promise me you'll stay safe." Akechi walked away, confused and a little shaken. What his mother didn't know was that her rejection meant more than she realized. The Grand Master had given him strict instructions. If any of his family members ever rejected his money, he must never offer it to them again. And if any of them ever accidentally dropped money into his bowl, the consequences would be devastating. Akechi didn't fully understand why that rule mattered so much, but he agreed to it when he made the deal. Now, knowing his own mother wanted nothing to do with his wealth left him unsettled. Still, he convinced himself that she was just being overly cautious, maybe even afraid of success. Back in Asaba, he returned to his usual routine fine restaurants, expensive clothes, and women who used to ignore him now trying to catch his attention. Life was good, at least on the surface. But behind the wealth and new lifestyle was a growing distance between Akechi and the life he used to know, and most importantly, between Akechi and the truth he kept avoiding. Deep down, he knew his mother's words weren't just paranoia, they were a warning, but he had come too far to turn back now. There was one thing Akechi had always wanted but never had, a DCI. She was beautiful, graceful, and carried herself like someone born into wealth, which she was. Her father, Chief MMO, was a prominent businessman in Asaba, respected and envied in equal measure. Back when Akechi first arrived in the city, he had tried to speak to her a few times, but she never gave him a second glance. He didn't blame her. Back then, he was just another struggling young man with dusty shoes and empty pockets. But now, with money in the bank, 2 functioning pharmacies under his name, and a luxury car parked outside house, he felt the power shift. Still, her pride was hard to crack. So he devised a plan, one that involved returning to the street not as the man he had become, but as the character who had brought him all his wealth, the imbecile beggar. Akechi waited patiently for the right opportunity, and when he saw Chief Imamo's car approaching one morning, he limped into the road, twisting his face and dragging one leg like he had practiced so many times before. The car slowed. He shuffled over to the back window where the chief sat and extended his bowl. The chief looked at him with pity and dropped a few currency notes into the bowl. Akechi smiled inside, already imagining the fallout. As expected, the very next day, the news hit the city like wildfire. Chief Imamo had suffered a terrible loss. A large shipping container carrying millions in goods had sunk in the ocean. If that weren't enough, by evening, 4 of his retail shops were completely destroyed in a sudden fire. The rumors started almost instantly. People whispered about curses, karma, and rituals. Some claimed they had always suspected the chief of doing something dark to gain his wealth. As the community pulled away from him, Akachi leaned in closer. He paid visits, offered sympathy, and gave the chief generous amounts of money to help him get back on his feet. The chief, touched by the young man's humility and kindness, welcomed him with open arms. Slowly but surely, Adisi began warming up to him. She saw how he stood by her father when everyone else turned their backs. She started to notice the little things, his gentle tone, his patience, his generosity. Before she knew it, she was letting her guard down. The two of them began spending time together, going out for lunch, taking walks, even laughing at inside jokes. Soon, they were officially a couple. Her father gave his full blessing. To him, Akechi was the man who showed up in their darkest hour, a true son. What neither of them knew, of course, was that none of the help Akachi offered could truly fix what had been broken. Each time he gave the chief money, something strange happened. It disappeared. Emergencies, bills, unplanned disasters. Somehow the money slipped through his fingers like water. But the chief never blamed Akachi. In fact, he only appreciated him more for trying. For Akachi, this was all part of the plan. He couldn't give money to his mother, but he could give it freely to the man who unknowingly empowered his rise. As time passed, Akachi distanced himself from his roots entirely. He no longer visited the village. He saw no need. His new life was here with Adisia, and he planned to build a future with her. The wedding was scheduled, preparations were underway, and Akachi felt like he was finally winning in every sense of the word. He had love, money, power, and all he had to do was play his part a few times a week, put on torn clothes, twist his face, and collect other people's futures in a bowl. But beneath the surface of all the happiness and new beginnings, a storm was quietly brewing, and it would only take one wrong encounter to bring everything crashing down. Just 1 month before the wedding, Akachi set out for what he felt would be a regular begging trip. He had decided to visit a far-off village to avoid being recognized and, as usual, put on his torn clothes, contorted his face, and limped through the streets with the cursed bowl in hand. After sitting on a quiet corner for a while, a young man passed by and, moved with pity, dropped a small note into the bowl and walked away. It seemed harmless routine even, but what followed was anything but. Hours passed, and for the first time since he began, no one else stopped to give Akachi money. It was as if he'd become invisible. Even when he moved to another location, the results were the same. Confused and panicking, he rushed to the Grand Master's mansion to report the strange occurrence. But the moment he stepped inside, the Grand Master's voice boomed through the air, filled with anger and fear. "Take the cursed money back." Akachi was stunned. "My lord, what do you mean?" he asked, but the Grand Master silenced him and conjured the scene of the transaction. "That boy who gave you money, he's related to you. Didn't I warn you?" The weight of the warning crushed him. Akachi tried to argue, insisting he didn't recognize the man, but it didn't matter. The rules were clear, and he had broken them. Desperate to fix what had been done, Akichi returned to the village, searching for the young man he now believed might be his cousin. He asked around, but no one knew him, and he began to lose hope. As a last resort, he traveled back to his own village and questioned his mother. At first, Amo was confused, unsure why her son was acting so frantic. But when he pressed her, asking if he had any cousins or relatives born around the same time as him, she remembered something faint. His step-uncle's wife had given birth to a son in the city. They had never met. Akachi's stomach dropped. Could it really be him? He left his mother's house in a daze, bowl in hand, and wandered the streets until by sheer chance he saw the young man again. Without thinking, he ran toward him and begged him to take the money back. "Please, I'm not who you think I am. I'm your cousin. I'm not really a beggar. That money you gave me, it wasn't just money. I need you to take it back," he pleaded. The young man was confused and uncomfortable. He tried to brush Akachi off, saying, "I gave it willingly. Just keep it." But Akachi grabbed his arm, begging him to just touch the bowl and take the note back. The Nan refused. They struggled. And then just like that, Akachi lost control. In one horrifying moment, the man who had pretended to be an imbecile became one. Right there, in front of a growing crowd, he began muttering, drooling, and walking in circles. His voice turned to gibberish. His eyes went empty. The people tied him up, thinking he had gone mad, and took him to his mother. When Ima saw her son in that state, she collapsed in tears. She had feared something like this all along. The young man who gave him the money confirmed that he was, in fact, Akachi's cousin, and when he learned what had happened, he too was shaken. Ima called a pastor to pray for her son, but after hours of pleading with heaven, the pastor said something that broke her heart. He is only reaping the consequences of what he chose. He wore the mask of a fool until the mask became real. As if that wasn't enough, Adisiai, his fiancée, arrived in the village, looking for him after finding his shops completely burned to the ground and his house occupied by strangers. When she finally laid eyes on him, she couldn't believe what she saw. She returned home and told her father everything. That's when Chief Imamo realized that the beggar he had pitied was Akachi all along the same day he lost everything. He too sought spiritual help, hoping to reclaim what had been taken, but for Akachi, it was too late. His story ended not with the wealth he chased, but with the very madness he pretended to have. Now, tied to the back of the house, he lives out his days in silence, no longer the man who sought fortune, but a broken shell of who he used to be. And perhaps that is the real warning hidden in this story. Sometimes the shortcuts we take in life, those that seem harmless or justifiable because they don't involve violence, can destroy us from the inside out. When we build success on the downfall of others, no matter how clever we think we are, it will always come back to us. Akachi didn't realize that pretending to be broken would eventually break him. He believed he could control the darkness he partnered with. But evil is never truly under control, it only waits. So let his story be a lesson. What you chase matters, but how you chase it matters even more.